Feel it shaking.
What's going on, everybody? Today I have got a 2015 Lexus IS250 that has some major brake problems. It is shaking violently when applying the brakes, and just wait until you see the root cause of the problem. Let's start off by raising the vehicle so we can see if the brakes are sticking. I give the wheel a spin to see if there's any resistance or if I can hear the rotor contacting the pads, but it seems just fine. So now I'll take the wheel off and start a deep dive to find the root issue. Generally, shaky brakes come from warped rotors, but this Lexus isn't that old, and it certainly does not have enough miles on it for warped rotors, at least not to me. Upon closer inspection, I do notice that these rotors have likely been turned before. All the rotors on the vehicle have been marked LF, RF, RR, and so on. The only reason that this would be done is if a technician removed and wanted to install the rotors back in the same place. These particular rotors have the same part number, are non-directional, and can go on right or left side, so the factory has no need to mark them this way. Now, we'll start disassembling the caliper by removing the two bolts that hold it onto the bracket. Then I use some gear ties to hold the caliper out of the way and prevent it from pulling on the brake line. The caliper mounting bolts have a high torque, and I recommend using a breaker bar, not what I'm doing here. Your hand is not a good hammer. Then just slide the brake pads off, and you can unscrew the bolts to remove the bracket. Since I suspected it had been worked on not long ago, I attempted breaking the rotor free with my rubber mallet, but I had no luck. These rotors have two threaded holes that can be used to separate them from the hub. Just be sure to remove the rotor evenly by using both holes, otherwise you risk damaging the lugs. With everything off, be sure to inspect the pads and make a note of how they are installed. Pads that came off of the car have metal shims on both sides, and the small tangs, commonly called rabbit ears, should be pointed towards the ground when installed. The owner decided to upgrade the brakes rather than turning the rotors again, so he purchased a slotted rotor and brake kit. This will give better braking performance, and I prefer slotted rotors over drilled rotors because drilled rotors have a tendency to crack. Before putting the new rotors on, I give the hub a light coating with copper anti-seize to make future servicing easier. There are people who disagree with this, but they are in the comments section and they don't actually do anything. Another benefit from the anti-seize is that it can create enough surface tension to hold the rotor in place while you mount the bracket. So as long as you don't get any anti-seize on the braking surface of the rotor, you're fine. Next, I inspect the pins in the caliper mounting bracket and discover the reason why the old rotors were actually warped. This one has a stuck guide pin. Guide pins should slide in and out easily with your fingers. If they don't, then it's time to replace. A stuck pin can create extra heat by causing brake pads to drag. You may not notice it when driving unless it's severe, but over time that heat will ruin a rotor. When the guide pin does finally come out, we will need to clean the guide pin hole before installing the new pin. I found that a 9mm brush from a gun cleaning kit fits the hole perfectly. I forgot to film the installation of the new pin in the old caliper bracket, but I'll put in a clip of me installing a new pin in the new caliper bracket for the passenger side of the vehicle. The 11/16 socket was the perfect tool to use for this job. Just press the boot into the socket so you won't pinch the rubber during installation. Then I use pliers to gently force the boot into the socket cavity. Next, place something underneath the caliper bracket to support it while you press the new boot into the hole. Then install the rubber O-ring over the detent on the pin and coat it with grease. Then fill the hole with grease. You really can't add too much grease here, as any excess will work its way out, but you can add too little, so be sure you're generous with the grease. Now that the pin is in, we can put the bracket and caliper back on. Because these are new brakes, we will need to push the caliper piston into its shortest position. Be sure to use the right tool here. Do not use a big pair of pliers and clamp the piston down. Doing this can damage the caliper and cause fluid to leak. After that, just slide the pads back into place with the rabbit ears down and bolt the caliper on. Now we can torque the caliper mounting bracket bolts to 80 foot-pounds. And the caliper bridge bolts to 23 pounds, but be sure to hold the guide pins with a wrench to keep them from spinning. And this is a Lexus, so torque your lug nuts to 76 foot-pounds, or don't. But keep in mind that another cause of warped rotors is improper wheel torque. Also, there are several engine, drivetrain, and wheel options on this car, so refer to your manual for these torque values.
So, I just loosened the top caliper. When I loosened the top caliper, I noticed there was a lot of movement still. That's because this bottom bolt was not all the way in. If you look at the bottom bolt, you will notice that it is severely stripped. So, someone put it in and torqued it down, but they didn't make sure that it was seated all the way. So when I loosened the top bolt, the whole caliper mounting bracket was shaking just like this. And that's because this bolt was in, but it wasn't tightened. So essentially, if the washer is the flange, it was right here, so it wasn't tightened all the way down. So just because you hit torque doesn't mean something is seated. And the reason that it torqued and did not seat is because someone cross-threaded it. And now this job just got a whole lot harder because we need to check the status of the threads that are inside this caliper mounting bracket. This is the good bolt that came out of this hole. Look how nice everything looks in there. And this is the strip bolt, which came from here. And it's just, you can even see, like, you can see all the way through this hole here. And this hole has got something built up on the back side of it. Look at that. And that's because it wasn't seated all the way. That's probably the metal that was being moved as he kept forcing this bolt to go in the hole. It was very hard to get out.
As shown, the passenger side brakes had some issues as well. I re-tapped the caliper bracket and I chased the threads on the bolt, but when we mounted the caliper back and tightened everything down, there was a noticeable bend in the bracket, which would cause the brake pads to wear unevenly and more than likely warp the rotor again. So we had to order a new part. It's a dealer part, by the way, to make sure the vehicle was safe and to prevent further braking issues. I would like to point out that this vehicle was bought used from a private lot, not from a Lexus dealership. My theory is that they turned the rotors prior to sale knowing that they had severe shaking when pressing the brake pedal, but they did not investigate to see why the rotors were warping in the first place. Knowing that it would soon be off the lot and become someone else's problem, they just did the easy thing. That's why it's important to diagnose problems and determine root cause. Anyone can change parts, but a good mechanic should know how a system works and follow basic troubleshooting guidelines, which, by the way, are spelled out pretty clearly in the dealer manuals, and basically anyone could follow them. That's all for today. Thanks for sticking around to the end of the video. Please leave a comment, hit the like button, and if you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe and ring the bell to see my future uploads. If you enjoyed today's content and want to see more videos like this, please help support the channel by reading the video description and visiting my Teespring store. There you can find shirts, mugs, stickers, to let the world know that you are a certified internet mechanic. Thanks. Y'all have a good day.